Despite the fact that Simon had been living in New York for a long time, he was still very fond of the northern Ohio town in which he spent his childhood. It didn't have the loud noises of the metropolis or the never-ending traffic, and there weren't as many neon ads on buildings, or they were much smaller. Simon went out there twice a year, in winter and in summer. But that visit was an exception to the rule, and Simon had a good reason for it. The fact was that he came to visit the grave of his mother, who died exactly 1 year ago. Simon was on a long business trip in Western Europe at the time and only learned about his mother's death after the funeral. Unfortunately, the business world can be harsh sometimes, interfering in a person's life in the most unceremonious way. That was the case with Simon, who couldn't just quit his internship and thus miss the funeral of his own mother. Later, the man regretted his decision and often reproached himself for it, but he could no longer change the past. And now, approaching his mother's grave, Simon touched the concrete tombstone with his hand and said quietly, "Well, hello, Mom." Of course, the businessman didn't get an answer, but it wasn't important. Unable to hold back his tears, Simon asked his mother for forgiveness. The businessman apologized for everything, for his rare visits, and for only calling her in emergencies. Such behavior was mainly caused by the fact that Simon had been living a rich life lately, forgetting what it was like to live in a small town. The businessman rubbed his eyes and once again apologized to Mary Lopez in his mind. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, he heard a quiet, childish voice. "Don't cry, mister. Everything will be fine. I know that." Simon flinched and turned sharply. At that moment, he saw a girl of about 7 years standing in front of him. She looked him in the eyes with childish innocence. "What are you doing here? The graveyard isn't the best place for kids to play," Simon said in surprise. "My grandmother makes me beg for money. Sometimes the visitors give me $1 or 2 for reading a prayer over the graves of their loved ones," the girl explained. Simon shrugged his shoulders and then asked, "What's your name, and where do you live?" "I'm Mary. I live on Park Street, sir, near the large store with the beautiful red roof," the girl answered. Hearing the girl's name, the businessman tensed up visibly. "Strange, the girl has the same name as my mother did. That's a weird coincidence." It took Simon one glance to conclude that the girl came from a poor family. Mary's clothes were probably bought in thrift stores, and due to their lack of shape and color, looked more like burlap than actual clothes. The girl's silky hair was pulled up in a ponytail, tied with an elastic band to make it look neater and prevent it from getting into the girl's eyes when she walked. Simon's heart sank at the sight of the girl's pitiful appearance. The businessman didn't have children, and his fiancée definitely wasn't planning on becoming a mother anytime soon. "Mary, let's go to the store and get you everything you want," Simon suggested. The man wanted to help the little girl, who apparently was very hungry. To Simon's great joy, the girl accepted his invitation without hesitation. At the supermarket, the businessman advised the child to take whatever she wanted, telling her that she didn't need to worry about money. At the same time, Simon was very surprised to see that Mary did her best to make sure that she got everything her grandmother might need. How callous and cruel does one need to be to send their grandmother to beg at a cemetery? Simon caught himself thinking. But when the businessman loaded the groceries into his Ford and brought Mary to her grandmother's house, he understood everything without words. An unpleasant-looking woman came out to greet her granddaughter. Her face made it obvious that she had an alcohol abuse problem. "What took you so long? Where were you? You were supposed to come home a long time ago." The woman started berating the girl right at the door. Mary was clearly afraid of her. She hid behind Simon and covered her ears with her hands. The young businessman tried to reason with her grandmother, but that wasn't as easy to do as it seemed. "Don't tell me what to do. I'll take care of things as I see fit. This isn't even my granddaughter. Her mother asked me to look after her. She gave me money, but it ran out a long time ago," the woman snapped angrily. Her response alarmed Simon. How is that even possible? Why would anyone leave their own daughter in the care of a stranger? The businessman thought. He didn't want to go, much less leave Mary with the grumpy woman. Opening his wallet, Simon took out several bills and showed them to the owner of the house. Here, take it. I think it would be enough to smooth out all the misunderstandings. I will give you this money, but on one condition. Mary will go with me. The businessman added in a tone that brooked no objections. The greedy look on the woman's face made it obvious that Simon's proposal hit the mark. You've got yourself a deal, sir. My name is Pamela Lang, and God knows I can keep my word. You can take this mean little girl and even get custody of her if you wish. The owner of the house answered. Simon nodded and handed her the money. Then he put Mary on the soft, leather-covered passenger seat of his car and started the engine. Looking at the little girl in the rearview mirror, the man winked at her and made a cute face. Mary smiled back, took a chocolate bar out of the grocery bag, and started eating it right away. Simon looked at the girl with undisguised tenderness as they pulled away in his Ford. The man had long dreamed of adopting a child from an orphanage, but there was always something that got in his way. Sometimes he felt that he was too busy at work. Other times it was his fiancée who objected to this idea. Kate wasn't just against having her own child, but she was also against Simon's desire to adopt. I want to live for myself, dear. All these diaper changes and midnight feedings, that's not for me. The woman kept repeating every time the subject came up. Her position upset Simon deeply, since he always dreamed of having a large, happy family. Simon had already been in an unsuccessful relationship once, which ended with him leaving for New York. Even though Evelyn was truly the woman of his dreams, the young people fought over something unimportant and even broke up over it. Simon never saw his first love again and only thought of her when taking a trip down memory lane, thinking of his youth and the days gone by. After all, Simon could have stayed in the province and lived with Evelyn, but instead, the young man chose to move to New York, which was the center of the universe for him. The young businessman was lost in his thoughts until the voice of the girl sitting behind him pulled him out of his memories. Mr. Simon, where are we going? To New York, right? Yes, Mary, that's right. Trust me, it's the best city on earth. Simon answered with a smile. He knew that Kate wouldn't greet the girl with open arms, but he was adamant in his intention to apply for custody. The first thing he did upon arriving in New York was go to the children's clothing store, where he intended to buy Mary all the clothes she wanted. The poor girl was gleaming, trying on one dress after another. Unable to make the choice, Mary looked questioningly at Simon. We'll take them all. The businessman turned to the shop assistant. He knew the emotions the girl was feeling, and so he was happy to fulfill any of her desires. Mary was so happy she couldn't stand still, jumping around like a little bunny rabbit. Seeing the girl's excitement brought tears to Simon's eyes. The man knew that no money in the world was worth more than seeing the joy in the eyes of a child. As Simon expected, Kate started a fight over his decision to bring a foster child home. But the businessman was ready for it, so without any further ado, he showed the arrogant woman to the door. Simon had long been thinking about breaking up with Kate, and this fight was simply the straw that broke the camel's back. Pursing her lips displeasedly, Kate left Simon's house, telling him in no uncertain terms that she wasn't going to change her mind. Ignoring his now ex-fiancée and acting as if nothing happened, Simon showed Mary to her room and helped her put away her new clothes. Now that the businessman had a child in his care, he realized that he had finally found what his life had been missing all this time. Talking to Mary, Simon felt a special connection that usually only exists between a father and a daughter. Of course, the man knew that the girl was well aware that she wasn't his biological child. But on the other hand, it was better to live with a caring foster father than a woman who made her beg for money at a cemetery. From then on, Simon spent all of his free time with Mary. The man took his daughter on walks in the park, bought her sweets, and even rode a roller coaster with her. One day, as they were returning home from a walk, Simon noticed a woman on the street. She was limping on her left leg. Her face seemed familiar to the businessman, so he picked Mary up and slowed down a bit. The stranger turned around sharply and exclaimed, barely containing her emotions, "Mary, how did you end up here with Simon?" The woman asked in a trembling voice. Now it was Simon's turn to be surprised. "Evelyn? Is that you? What's going on here? And how do you know Mary?" the man exclaimed. Looking at each other, Evelyn and Simon realized that they needed to have a serious conversation. Still unable to understand what was happening, Mary blinked rapidly and turned her head from Simon to Evelyn. They went to a nearby cafe and Simon ordered a coffee and muffin for Evelyn and a huge vanilla ice cream for Mary. Then he looked inquiringly at the woman whom he'd once loved so very much. Simon made it clear with his eyes that he was waiting for an explanation. Evelyn sighed sadly and, suppressing her emotions, started telling her story. "When we broke up 8 years ago, I was already pregnant, Simon. My parents didn't want to have anything to do with the child, but I couldn't make myself get an abortion. Having given birth to our daughter, I left her with a woman who I knew worked as a nanny. I wanted to earn money to get my own place, so I wouldn't have to live with my alcoholic parents. I went to New York and worked as a seamstress in a factory and a maid in a roadside motel. One day, I was hit by a car on my way home from work. Fortunately, I managed to survive, but I do have a limp now. I continued to work and send part of my salary to Pamela Lang, who had been looking after my daughter all this time. And recently she told me on the phone that some man had my daughter. I only ever saw Mary in photographs, and now we're here." Simon turned pale. Trying to steady his trembling hands, he asked the question that had worried him from the first minutes of the conversation. "So our daughter's name is Mary, right? Mary is our daughter?" Evelyn looked into his eyes and nodded silently. At that moment, Mary dropped the spoon she was using to eat the ice cream. All these years, the little girl believed that she had no parents and that her only family was her grandmother, Pamela. And now, in a very short time, she found both her mom and dad, whom she only ever saw in her dreams. The three of them left the cafe together. Evelyn walked on Simon's left and Mary was on his right. Passers-by smiled at them, seeing them as a perfect young family. On the way home, Simon contacted one of the best clinics in New York and arranged for a consult with the surgeon so that Evelyn could get rid of her lameness once and for all. The man had no doubt that everything would turn out great. Then he picked Mary up and whirled her in the air, as if she was a giggling little plane. Enjoying the sound of his daughter's laughter, the man grew even more convinced that the ways of the Lord are mysterious and everything in this life happens for a reason, guided by some higher powers.